Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Speculate. We are here among the strange friends with a special guest this evening to talk more about the game Girl by Moonlight, coming out soon from Eagle Hat. We have a lot of feelings about it and about Fractal Spire, our uh, wonderful playtest actual play of the game, and I'm looking forward to talking about it with all of these lovely people, including the designer themselves, Andrew Gillis, who is here to join us and regale us with wonderful stories about how this thing was made. But before we begin our conversation about the thing, I would like to ask all of these people to please introduce themselves to lovely people watching or listening to this by letting everyone know who you are, what you do, and who you played in our game of Fractal Spire, starting with Mike.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike. I am one of the co-hosts of Speculate, along with Brandon and Gregory A. Wilson. I'm a author and podcaster and professional GM. My latest series is my first series, but again in paperback, which is about geeky magicians using their fandom as a magic source. That starts with Geekomancy. You can find that wherever. And I play video games sometimes at twitch.tv/turbotango. They, he pronouns for me. I played Vic Sains, the Guardian, who uses they, them pronouns, and whose avatar is Deed, who is she, they. That's me.
Next, Valerie.
Hello, hello. I am Valerie Valdes. I'm the author of the Chilling Effect trilogy and the forthcoming Where Peace is Lost, planetary romance, space fantasy, whatever you want to call it. I also stream on Twitch as the kids are asleep, which is when I stream. And I was playing Nina Lopez, the unlikely hero, she, her pronouns. Her avatar ultimately was Atrevida, also she, her pronouns.
Next, Jeoi.
Hello, hello, Yoi Gawain Lin, game and fiction writer. They, he pronouns for me. I played Vermilion Jingwei Ruth, the outsider, in the game. They, he pronouns for Ruth, and the Ruth's avatar was Ruthless. She, they pronouns for her.
And last but not least, Iori.
Kusano Iori, they them pronouns, author of the forthcoming Hybrid Heart that will be on sale at the end of March from Neon Hemlock. We are so excited. I played Kat Holly, the time traveler who never henshined on screen. Oops. And FTC regulations and corporate policy require me to disclose that I am a wizard of the coast. I am not on the D&D team.
Oh Lord.
I am also not on the Magic team. I am on the team no one has heard of. And I'm having lots of fun there.
We will fix that at some point, but still. Um, as for me, I am Brandon O'Brien. I was the GM of our Girl by Moonlight actual play Fractal Spire. I am one of the co-hosts of Speculate and a writer, poet, and game designer from Trinidad and Tobago. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. Uh, so I, in the game, played all of the parts of the world of Cloud Harbor that sucked for all of these characters, and some of the parts that didn't suck, but those were very few and far between, unfortunately. And with us is Andrew Gillis. Would you like to please introduce yourself to all of these lovely people?
Yeah, that's me. I'm Andrew Gillis. I'm a game designer and probably some other stuff, but in what matters here is that I am a game designer. I use they them pronouns. And Girl by Moonlight is a game that I made and that these fine folks played.
It is. And I'm very excited to talk more about it. Before I ask the very thoughtful, methodical, journalist-esque questions that I have written down in this black book about the game, I would like to invite everybody else to please tell Andrew what you thought about the game as we were playing Fractal Spire.
So
And perhaps we should start with Mike.
I can go first. I think I've talked about this in public before, but the pick list world building elements on the play sheets is so cool. I had so much fun, like working through that with everybody. I played a little bit of a game offline just with some friends using earlier playtest materials. And so I've had the chance to kind of work through lists from two of
Mm.
the playsets. And it was so much fun to have just little bits of inspiration and aesthetic that you had put into each playset, both to orient and to inspire. And so I want to say thank you for that. It's very cool. And I want to encourage other designers to take a look at that and see if that's something that sparks anything in you.
Yeah, it was really fun watching you all play your first session because you're all writers and were able to, like, I was watching you in real time kind of see what the point of the various bits and pieces were, or like, oh, this is what this is doing. And like, and so you were all very adept at going through that process in a really fruitful way and had like really good conversations around it. But yeah, I there were a bunch of reasons for wanting to include something like that. Both the things that you mentioned and also this idea that like if I play the game and then I go and talk to someone else who has played the game in the same playset, we can be like, oh, what were your choices there? What was your world like? And we kind of understand the pieces that it was made out of, right? It's like the Lego bricks have been assembled in a different shape, but we still can recognize, oh, that's the big red brick, that's the yellow brick. Um, and so it's neat to have like a point of common connection across games, and that's something that you can see at work in games like Apocalypse World, where there are like
Right.
specific NPC names or whatever, where it's like, oh yeah, what was Rolf Ball like in your Apocalypse World game? And you can kind of go and ask anyone that's played those kinds of questions and get really fun conversations out of them, and they kind of help build a shared cosmology of like characters and places and things, which I really like as part of the like folk practice of role playing.
Yeah, I'm curious at what point did Girl by Moonlight become four games in one in terms of having the playsets?
Yeah, it's hard to stop once you get started with like something that's like a hack, right? Like the game was very much a hack of blades in terms of my um, process. I would say I would kind of fit it within that mold. Um, and once I had all of the kind of ports exposed of where you can plug in the different things, because of how Blades is structured, there is this layer of material that you can kind of independently remove and then socket something else in. And so it didn't take much massaging or changing to kind of get to a place where I could say, okay, instead of a crew sheet, I have this thing I'm calling the playset, and just expanding the scope of what that included because I needed to come up with a setting and I didn't want to have a specific setting. And then once you have the tools for making the setting, given that it's the list picking structure, it's really easy to swap that out for something else. And then once you swap that out, why not make, a different little set of modular rules that plug into the base game so that you can have giant robots or weird dream traveling stuff. And there were all these other kind of nearby touchstones to the original stuff that I was working with, which was Maruka, um, primarily, and then a little bit of like Steven Universe, Sailor Moon, because I was like, okay, well, I got to do that, and then at that point, you may as well make four if you're gonna make one and then two, so why not four? Yeah.
All right.
Would anyone else like to add anything? Valerie, I see you have thoughts.
I do, and I'm trying to just kind of put them together into a cohesive format here that is both question and comment without being weird. I really loved the way that the avatars worked in this game. I thought that it was really cool since we were playing the Maze of Dreams set. The notion of the avatars as both separate yet interconnected with the characters was very cool. The fact that they weren't just simple alter egos, because I feel like that is something that can occur in different games and in different media, where you just have, this is just kind of a reflection of this character. This is their self in some form or fashion. But this challenged us to make the avatars individual characters in and of themselves. And so, even though mine didn't really manifest ultimately until the very end, it was still like um, every time an avatar appeared, it was different from their character. And it meant that you had not only the relationships between the characters themselves, but then the relationships between the untranscended and transcended selves in various permutations. And that was really cool to explore. Um, when you were putting that together, you had touchstones for that are in there. But what kinds of stuff were you thinking about, I guess, just in setting up that element of the game?
Yeah, so in the two playsets that kind of make use of this similar little, I don't know what you would call it, like mode that I came up with, because there's in A Maze of Dreams where you have this like dream self, and then there's also on A Sea of Stars where you have a giant sentient like engine robot thing that you pilot. Um, and so I did Sea of Stars first, and there was this desire to have the engines not just be machines, but to have personalities and so it was more like the analogy that I kind of developed in my head was like it's not like you're driving a car, it's like you're riding a horse. And you can tell a horse to jump off a cliff, but it's not going to do it, right? Like they're going to know danger when they see it, and they're going to have their own kind of instincts and personality and self-preservation and all these other competing things, and you need to develop a relationship to and build trust with that creature in order to then have them do the courtesy of running around for you. And so when it came time to get to Maze of Dreams, I liked those elements, and I wanted to figure out a way that I could make them a little more fraught and a little bit more oppositional, but also it was a great opportunity to bring in some tension around people's own identities and these like versions of themselves that they might become, but that they are kind of intimidated by or at odds with in some way. Like there's a really almost heavy-handed, I would say, kind of trans metaphor in there, and in the like one shot that I'm writing for that playset, the main character is an unlikely hero who's hinted possible other self is a woman, and they're not, they haven't gotten that far yet, and they're in fact really uncomfortable with anything that feminine or whatever, right? Like there's a tension between where they are now and who they might be in a way that is like a threat. And that was to me really fun, but I think in the course of play it does mean that Maze of Dreams is kind of like the most advanced. If I had to like group them in terms of like here's the ones that are better for beginners and here's the like the advanced course, Maze of Dreams definitely asks a lot of the protagonists in terms of um, taking an interest in really either more difficult topics or complicated, internal character struggles and stuff like that that need to be shown in a more kind of explicit or performed way that they might take on. But also they have to give up a lot of stuff to the director, who can then at any time be like, yeah, your avatar wants to do this thing. What are you going to do about that? Right? Like there's an antagonist that is always inside of you, always kind of present, waiting for you, waiting to have like an opportunity to do something. And to that end also, that's why all the desires for avatars are like totally fucked up. Like they just want these things that are too big. They're like kind of impossible to reconcile with anything else. They're very absolute, and weird. And that was really, I think, important to create that feeling of like, like if you are an uncracked egg, the idea of being a man or a woman or whatever might feel impossible to you and overwhelming and like big in ways that you aren't ready to deal with. And so it's fun to have that be that, yeah, your avatar wants to like become a god or whatever, right? Like this really absurd and larger than life thing.
Yes. Iori, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to phrase this, but it's really interesting to me that you chose Magical Girls as a venue in which to explore gender and queerness because living in Japan, I am so used to magical girls actually being used as a tool to uphold gender stereotypes and rules. Could you talk a little bit more about your motivation in that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that thing, right, of like Sailor Moon got turned into a thing to sell toys for girls, and it was because they didn't have good vehicles for doing that at the time that it was coming out, that it kind of got leveraged in this way, and that really it does have this kind of like 80s and 90s early feminist girl boss kind of mode about like, yeah, you're gonna want to like wear skirts and put on lipstick, but in a way that is good now instead of a way that is disempowering or whatever, right? Like it's on its face, it's a little bit limited,
Yeah.
um, in that sense. But that's not my relationship to it as a person writing this game. For me, this was about like what was little kid Andrew who would watch Sailor Moon and be like, oh, I'm really like this show is cool and fun and I'm interested in it. And then it's like, what does that mean? And so it's about a certain kind of relationship to that genre or those pieces of media and the ways in which those were like formative or, you know, did things to my little child brain, or in my little child brain that were, productive in that way, even as the thing itself might not contain all of that on its own, right? Because yeah, there is a very interesting history with the development of the genre, and where, like for its time, even you could say that it was breaking through certain bounds, but then it, of course, once it can get incorporated into this larger machine of, cultural production that pushes, it gets incorporated into the status quo in ways that are not very helpful or transgressive, even if at one point it was cool and a little bit pushy to say like, oh yeah, here is like a young woman fighting monsters, fighting evil by moonlight and winning love by daylight. Look at her go, isn't that cool? And totally unprecedented, with the exception of like the show that she did before that, which was like some weird medieval fantasy thing. I can't quite remember all the details of it, but there's like a princess who becomes like a little Legend of Zelda Link to the Past kind of looking guy to fight an evil vizier or something. And that was the thing that got us to the point where we could even have Sailor Moon at all. And yeah, it's so yeah, it's definitely about like my relationship to a bunch of stuff, and it's very personal in that sense.
That's super cool.
It is. I could go on for ages about how the magical girl as a genre concept is actually built to be transgressive of gender, but that would take longer than we have time, so I'm not going to do that. Yoi, do you have any questions to ask?
Yes, I am actually curious about the methodology or the timeline, I guess, that came with building all of the playbooks or play sheets as a whole. Because when I was reading the document, it was very clear that, this is very much meant as a team game. The players are very much meant to play off of each other and with each other. And even in the ways where their playbooks oppose each other, um, it's done very deliberately mechanically. Um, so doing that even for one particular play series is a pretty heavy task, but then you have four different series and you have the mechanic of Eclipse toss in there. And reading through the various Eclipse prompts and the Eclipse escape clauses and how those kind of changed over development, it's very clear, okay, even when every character is at their worst possible point, every other character still has some means of getting them out of it, even just mechanically speaking. So because it's such an intricately interlocked system, I'm kind of curious as to what happened first, slash, um, were there any points where you were just going, oh my God, there are too many moving gears. What do I do? I am being mangled.
I mean, one of the things that helps it all be a bit more approachable is that, when you're designing, you can be working in the exploded diagram kind of scenario where all these things that are going to one day be packed in together and interlock, you can have them, laid out on your little handkerchief with all the, every bearing and cog and everything separated. And it's a bit more comfortable, in that sense. I can work on each thing as a little module. But the one big guiding principle with all of that stuff around like how downtime works and the reason that recovery works the way it does, the reason that all the Eclipse escape prompts involve another character, everything was always building towards this idea of like interdependence and mutual support within the group of protagonists, and that they really aren't meant to do things on their own. That's why, whereas Blades has four actions per attribute, and then you get full access to up to 4 dots. I was like, no, no, no. There's only 3. Everyone's more vulnerable. Everyone starts with less dots. You have to rely on teamwork more. You have to rely on links and these other kind of supplementary things more. And then when stuff does go wrong, um, you need your friends to come in and bail you out. You literally can't get out of Eclipse alone as any character. Even the stranger, who is the most kind of retreating character, needs other people's help in order to do that, and still has a bunch of stuff that ties them back into the other characters. Um, and ones that seem on their face to be oppositional, like you were playing the outsider where you have a rival, and it's like, yeah, fuck you. Everything I do is about you, actually, and like you are the center of my existence. Um,
Hi,
and
Mike.
so it's the stance within the fiction is one of opposition, but as a player, I'm going to pick the outsider if I'm really excited about someone else and their character, and I want to have lots of interactions with them. If I don't want to do that, I'm I have made a horrible mistake in being like, yeah, I hate you, and I'm just going to ignore you. That's not what the playbook is about, right?
Yeah, because our starting character relationships with this set of 4 protagonists, I felt like we had such a clearer sense of where everybody stood and how we related to each other, compared to the game of Blades, where Brandon added almost like a bond system so that each character was tied to at least 2 other characters, but those mechanics were kind of baked in and tied like to the other mechanics so quickly, so that I feel like that really enabled us to embody or deliver on that idea of starting with season 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was another fun little thing to come that came out of playtesting, actually. This idea of like, yeah, there was a season 1, it's already happened, don't worry about it. Um, was a
Mm-hmm.
very helpful conceit that we kind of stumbled into, and I was just like, oh, this is actually, if you stretch your brain a little bit to think about it, this is kind of what you do in Blades anyways, where when cutting to the action, is that you start in the middle, right? And you have space behind to backfill. And saying we start in season 2 is really just doing that for the overall arc of the story, and saying, oh yeah, we can flash back to establish a bunch of history as needed, and there's some open-ended space back there for us to that's still in play, right? That isn't just locked in and canonized. Um,
Yeah.
and that was a really, really fun thing to kind of just bump into while doing something else and be like, oh, this is helpful. Just pick this up, put it in my game. That's great.
Yeah. It like that's one of the things that I really like about Girl by Moonlight, because for lack of a better way of describing it, there is no time for everyone to meet at an inn. Um
No, it's not allowed.
yeah, like I'm thinking of, for instance, Sailor Moon is a very good touchstone. It takes several episodes, well, in the high double digits, for Usagi to meet every single person that will eventually be her ally, even though we know that all of these people have met before in a past life. And there's no time for that to happen in a game. So opening with the premise that you all already know each other, that this is a duty that you've already performed, is not only narratively convenient in the sense that we get to cut to the action, but it means that it asks mechanically for you to establish what these relationships are with these other characters in particular. And I like that there are things that happen in those individual character playbooks that, even though they are not uniquely bonded to that question, automatically lend themselves to asking and answering some of those questions. Like, I like that the time traveler's entire deal is, you've come from a timeline where this has gone poorly before, and you're here to make sure that doesn't happen. What is the thing that you need to change? Who is the individual, or what is the situation that you need to prevent so this doesn't happen again? Um, And I thought
Yeah,
all of those
because
things just kind of clicked together very conveniently.
yeah, because like so Sailor Moon is like written by a person. Someone knows what's going to happen in Sailor Moon when you're watching it. But when we're playing a role playing game, we're all just watching it. There's no one knows what's going to happen, and so it's a dishonest thing to do to say like, yeah, it's gonna go somewhere. We don't know it's gonna go somewhere. Why not just be there to start and take it from that place? Um, and so similarly, right, the time traveler uh, plays around with that whole idea of like, yeah, no, we don't actually know what's going to happen or what has happened in the past or anything like that. But as a player, I can say this thing is going to happen, or I'm here to stop this thing from happening, and I can make some big statement and give us some kind of concrete element to play around in what is otherwise a really kind of unformed and unexplored territory. And so, yeah, I think having falling into the kind of trap of step for step imitating fiction that we see in other media um, doesn't serve you well when playing role playing games because again, there's no author other than us playing. Like it's all kind of happening in the moment as we go, and so to imply that our or to say that our structure of our story is going to be the same as one that is written, you know, all pre-written and then that you go through one into the other. I mean, you're all authors, so you probably know this better than me, but like I can't imagine that you just start writing the first sentence of your story and then go proceed in a linear fashion to the end of your story. I don't think that's how it works,
I
right?
mean,
That's how the thing is consumed once it's made, but it's not how it's made. And since RPGs are the practice of making the thing, they're not the product at the end, right? The story that we all remember is the product at the end, but the act of play is the writing of the thing. So yeah, I would love to hear y'all's experience.
so we go ahead.
Honestly, I found it really difficult to play the time traveler. Like, in the hands of someone who is more competent at improv, this playbook would have been OP as hell. The only thing that saved us from like constantly breaking things was that I just don't think on my feet fast enough to keep it analyzing like, was this in the other timeline? What am I going to do about it? How did it go wrong? Because that was just too many moving parts to keep in my little gremlin brain.
But the way that you used the deck was amazing for that character because what it did was it gave you like external prompts to use when you were trying to improv stuff related to alternate timelines and futures and choices. So,
Yeah, part of it was that like we have so few dots in anything, right? And especially because my character was not optimized for hitting things, and a lot of the situations we got into would have been vastly easier to deal with the ability to hit things. I
This
felt
was by
like
design.
I frequently felt that I had no useful way to help the party or engage in the challenge beyond just like, okay, I pull a card. So that was a little difficult to deal with sometimes.
mhm.
That said, like once I saw it coming, oh boy. Oh boy, that was like a lot of power to receive very suddenly. Just like it is very much the power of not saying yes and anymore. It's the actually no.
Yeah, I think in role playing games, being able to say no to things is important, and both like player to player, certainly to be like, oh, I don't really want to go there or whatever. But like within the story, like part of how Blades is structured really is about the director or the GM or whatever saying this horrible thing happens, and then the player, sitting across from them getting to say like, oh, I can actually say no to that, and so you see the stakes of what's what could have gone wrong or whatever. There is this kind of inherent timey-wimey bullshit thing that happens in Blades that I wanted to carry on in GBM of just being able to say like, oh yeah, no, this horrible thing that could have happened and that we've seen, thanks to Brandon or whoever's florid descriptions of horrible mayhem, like what could have happened. And we say, no, 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 it doesn't go that way because my character steps in and does this thing or I avert it in this perfect way. Yeah, I think there is a lot of there is a fun power to be had in saying no as long as it's deployed, fruitfully and in the right context. But
Right, because there's the improv adage of always say yes and I
mhm,
think there is the version of saying no that you describe for me fits within the spirit of that because it is generative rather than shutting down the
exactly. Yeah.
diegesis or shutting down the fiction.
Yeah,
It's not
it's
just
a
no, it's
productive
no but.
no. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. So I actually wanted to ask something following up on something that you said earlier, Andrew, about how the flow of the game is designed to make characters trust and depend on one another on a regular basis during play. And one of the things that I thought was most revealing about Girl by Moonlight's structure is, unlike Blades, where indulgence of a vice is how you recover from stress during downtime. In Girl by Moonlight, you turn all of that on its head, which is obligation is now a thing that happens before we even get to a mission. And its duty is not to recover stress, it's to give you as much stress as possible. And in particular, that its narrative through line is to reinforce that the mundane world is intense and stressful and um, is, even when it is unlike all of the things that you're already accustomed to in your magical life, is still part of your magical life in that narrative sense. And I really want to hear more about why that was a decision that you decided to make in the game, because it's simultaneously one of my favorites mechanically, but as a GM, running it in the game is actually one of the most stressful experiences because you need to check in with players on a regular basis and go, "Hey, is everybody okay? This was a lot. Someone nearly lost their job. We're having a lot of fascism feelings all of a sudden.
It
Is this
cleaves
cool?"
it cleaves really close to real world stresses in a way that, is both by design, but also, yeah, it can be difficult territory. Exactly. So the big kind of thesis of the game is this idea that like the magical bad stuff that you're fighting, by moonlight is the same as all of your mundane data. Like they're connected, right? That they're not two separate pressures that you're caught between. It's not a rock and a hard place. It's a vice. It's a pair of pliers, right? Like that these things somewhere there's someone cranking both at the same time. And so to have the mundane world be a place where nothing bad happens was not acceptable. And one of the various ways that I found to kind of get at this was, yeah, to flip the whole blade stress cycle on its head, which also conveniently let me shift to like an episodic format, right? Because your stress resets episode to episode rather than being a kind of running tally that you're always tracking from, as time goes forward. Um, and so these things kind of ended up being, piled on to solve, problems created by the existence of the previous thing. But I ended up with a system that I was quite happy with, where, yeah, we get to see why it matters that the characters, do something, what they are trying to address or really fundamentally solve, and the ways in which that, persists over time, I think is really important as well to show that like you don't just eliminate, even at the end of a season, if you are, successful in pursuing whatever goal you have for that season, you're going to come back for the next season and there will still be the mundane world. You might achieve some little victories and like, oh, this character that was giving me a hard time last season is now a friend, and that's cool, but like the system still exists. And while you can make gains against that system, it is not, a knockout blow, but also that the characters can't fight misogyny directly. They have to go fight a monstrous embodiment of it, right? Because you can't just punch systemic issues in the face or appeal to their hearts because they don't have them and these kinds of things. So the split is necessary in order to allow for the kinds of action that the game wants to actually happen while still confronting the kind of structural stuff that it's about. Um, but yeah, flipping stress on its head was really fun. That was like a nice little design flourish that I'm very happy with, and had all kinds of fun, kind of downstream consequences once you flip that, it sets off this chain of design that's really, really compelling, I think. Um, and then allowing for elasticity in stress with Eclipse, which y'all, and I think a lot of people in general are kind of, especially having played Blades, they're like, "Ooh, I really don't want to hit that number at the end. That's bad." But I think as you play the game more, you start to realize like, oh, actually there's like a spring over at the end of my stress track, and I can fly into it at high speed and bounce off of it repeatedly. Because if you're really good at succeeding in eclipse rolls, you just sit at max stress and can keep spending stress and just making eclipse rolls. And then once you do go into eclipse, that's actually really fun. There's a state, you're in a state of risk, but there's like cool stuff that happens there as well. Um, and so having it, signal a dramatic moment, and create some tension in that way was really fun, but also creating this, because stress in Blades is it's pretty hard line, right? It's a very fixed resource that you have. Um, and there is some elasticity in your vice roll where like how much stress do you get back and how does that play? Um, and so I felt like I needed to keep some stretch in there to give a little bit of wiggle room, let you get some extra stress spends if you're lucky or whatever. Um, but to have, yeah, so it needed to preserve a little bit of wiggle, which is what the Eclipse roll ends up doing. And then being in Eclipse is just fun. I just love stuff like that. I'm a big Monster Hearts fan, so I can't help but include something like that. And it felt like it really suited the game.
I'm kind of sorry none of us eclipsed.
You know,
I did not realize that it would let you milk stress that way.
You get to use all your stress twice, right? Yeah, it's I think a thing that people can be a little nervous about, but then once you actually like jump in the water of Eclipse, it's a really fun space to play in. So I
Yeah.
hope that if y'all ever play the game again, you get to
Oh,
dive
there will
in.
be a season 3. I want it so very badly.
Right. Well, there was a like because Jeoi had kind of framed that Ruth/Ruthless was like in Eclipse for most of season one, and I'm curious, Jeoi, how that like looking at the mechanics, how you folded that into how you were role playing.
So the idea for me, for Ruth in season one was that he was in a supremely terrible place emotionally with regards to having lived through a whole bunch of like very passively terrible things in his life, coupled with some actively terrible things in his life. And so when Euphony came and basically dragged him into being part of this amazing group that was going to change the world so much and your destiny will soon be yours. He was just not emotionally ready for any of that whatsoever. But he was very unlucky in that no matter what terrible things he lived through, he would still continue living through them. So that was how him being in Eclipse for most of season one kind of worked in my mind, where he was just at that point where you have seen some shit, you are going through the shit, and the shit is just unending. And for some reason, for whatever reason, you just can't lie down and die. So you just keep going because that's the only thing you can do. Um, and I kind of wish that he did fall into Eclipse this particular season because, again, his relationships to other characters are all antagonistic, especially between him and Vic. So if he had gone into Eclipse or if Vic had gone into Eclipse, that would have been so interesting to see like how the antagonism between them was actually a good thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really wish it had happened.
There's at least one timeline where when Ruthless goes after Siobhan, Deed shows up and they just destroy each other by like going through to Eclipse. Because I, role playing wise, like, okay, are we going to have like Avatar on Avatar PvP here? And we found a way to end that episode that was still really interesting and pushed us forward that didn't go that way. But I feel like it was right there. Like there was an off ramp. So I feel like there was some like lingering presence of Eclipse, even if we didn't like dramatize it on screen.
Yeah. I think that Ruthless and Deed are actually a very hilarious battle couple together because Vic and Ruth have honestly a pretty hilarious not friendship going on. So I like because Vic has the not friendship with Ruth, but Vic is spurring that not friendship forward. I like to think that Rufus indeed have a not friendship, but Rufus is the one spurring that not friendship forward. And I just really love playing with foil characters and mirror characters, so I really wanted it to happen, but alas, some other time.
Yeah, and that was one thing that really stood out for me was the way you played Ruth.
Oh
There was
no.
some line you had early in like one of the first three, I want to say, sessions about like the nature of anger and some of its value that really resonated with me. I can't remember, I can't quote you exactly, but it was very well said. Um,
Oh.
and yeah, you did a great job of leaning into what that playbook is supposed to be doing. It was really, really fun to see someone pick it up and just be like, "Oh yeah, I get this. Like, let's go." Because yeah, like
Did
I
something
love
good.
playing characters that way. I love just being like, "Hey, you, hey buddy, like fuck you. Let's let's interact all the time." Is really, really fun to me, and that's something I tend to do anyways, or is like a useful play habit, especially with people I know well, like on a person to person level.
Mm.
And so it was fun to make that playbook and just be like, what are things I would want to do, and then just write a bunch of moves down. So yeah, it was great to see someone pick it up and run with it.
So, um, we don't have a lot of time left, but I definitely wanted to close with one question. Um, Everyone here, all of these strange friends are writers of renown. At least personally, to me, I think that their work is rad. Um, I'm very excited that they got the opportunity to play your game and give people the chance to see what your game looks like in play. I'm actually kind of curious as a result. Were there any things narratively that stood out to you personally watching Fractal Spire? Anything that it revealed either mechanically about the game, or was there like a narrative beat that really just stood out to you as a story beat that still like stands with you at this moment?
Well, if I run the tape backwards through my mind, the first thing I bump into is Valerie. Your big reveal for your character's avatar was Chef's Kiss. Perfect. It was so delightful. Um, Such a great inversion of the character. It was very fun and playful. Um, yeah, I mean, you all did a great job of setting up like a collection of characters that made sense together. And I don't want to take all the credit for that as a game writer, right? And be like, and that's because my game is perfect. Like you all obviously brought a ton to it and made this great interlocking set of characters. And so it was just a delight to watch them all, all those cogs turning and interlocking so nicely. Was really, really fun. Like the relationship between Iori's character and Michael's character of like the read I had on it was like your character like could have been in charge and was kind of deferring in this uncomfortable way to this other person who was then taking the lead. Like these kinds of tensions and dynamics, like you all thought it through and brought those in a way that was really, really compelling. So yeah, I can't pick too many favorites, but I'll just leave you with that.
Nice. And uh, of course, finally, I'd like to give you this moment to very briefly sell folks on Girl by Moonlight. Let people know when they can potentially look forward to actually uh, getting the book in their hands.
So it will be coming out this year. If I can help it, it'll be the first half of this year, but I can't give specific dates quite yet because there are a lot of things that are still kind of up in the air. We're getting art finished now. If you want to see updates, you should definitely follow Evil Hat. Look at their website, look on Twitter, that kind of thing. You can also follow me on Twitter at Commuting Crow, and I am posting updates, as I'm able and as I get cleared to like show art and stuff like that that's being made for the book. Um, and I'm very excited to share Girl by Moonlight with everyone. It's been a long time coming, and there have been a lot of bumps in the road in terms of getting this done, but it is finally happening. It's just in the part of the project where it's not me that's holding it up. Now it's other people's work that needs to get finished. And so it's coming soon.
I can't wait. I am very excited. After finally playing the thing digitally, I would like very much to have a book in my hand.
Yeah,
Um,
I want to have the book in my hands, and then I want to work on my next project and my next project and my next project, which are all already planned out
Wow.
yeah,
and I'm committed to. So I need to get started on those. You know, it never ends. But
the life of a designer. And of course, this is the part where we remind you that we are a captive audience for whatever you plan to make in the future. So if you'd like to run those by us, we'd be happy to play them.
well, yeah,
But yeah. Thank you so very much again for joining us. We're really glad that we
thank
got
you.
this opportunity to chat with you about the game. We could ask so many more questions, but we don't have that much time, unfortunately. Um, and to everyone watching and listening, thank you so very much for joining us for this special episode of Speculate, where we get to speak to Andrew Gillis about Girl by Moonlight. Again, keep your eyes peeled for more information about that game on Twitter. Follow Evil Hat on Twitter. They are very eagerly showing off some of the most amazing art that I've ever seen. So please check that out and uh, keep your eyes attuned for that news. But until then, this is The Strange Friends as Speculate signing off. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.